In today's video, we're building a 500 horsepower Toyota 2RZ. This is a 2.4 liter Tacoma engine from the 90s, and we're building this thing up to take 500 wheel horsepower or more with a ton of boost. I'm so excited, so let's get into it. It's gonna be a pretty simple build. We're gonna be using stock pistons, a stock block. I had it decked, but I did not have anything major done to it. It's getting new bearings, a nice set of quality connecting rods, and some nice piston rings, and that should be good for 500 plus horsepower. First thing I'm getting taken care of is I'm cleaning up these pistons. The person I got this block from had supposedly rebuilt it, but it's probably hard to see. But all of the oil drain holes in these pistons were completely gunked full. There were some that you couldn't even see through at all. And so what we're doing is we're taking a pick, we're cleaning out all of the oil drain holes out of this thing. I took off all of the piston rings that were in it because it says STD DNJ. So these are some DNJ or domestic and Japanese piston rings, which aren't really the most quality parts, and since I do plan on pushing this engine kind of far, I just don't want the rings to be a weak point, so that's why I got some Hastings rings. We're gonna be gapping these up, making sure they're quality and good to go, making sure the pistons are able to drain all of the oil with the oil rings so that we're not burning a bunch of oil and smoking on first startup, and hopefully giving this engine the best chance at a long, happy life, even though I'm pushing it further than it ever was intended to go by like threefold. Once the pistons are all ready, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna flip this block over, I'm gonna take the crankshaft that's hiding up there on my storage rack, and we're gonna start plastic gauging everything and making sure everything's within spec. We've got all of the piston rings gapped. They all look pretty good. I started with a hand file. That was taking forever, so I went ahead and moved to a Dremel with a little disc on it. We've got the top rings gapped to 30, the bottom gapped to 34, and then we've got all of the oil rings. They came out of the box at about 30. Don't necessarily need to gap the oil rings, but I wanted to make sure they weren't gonna have any issues either. I do plan on pushing this engine pretty hard. So now we should be able to start getting things assembled. We can get the rings on the pistons on the rods, all of that ready to drop in. Then I'm gonna flip the block over and we're gonna take the crank down and start plastic gauging. I'm gonna plastic gauge, I know it's not necessarily the perfect way, but I'm gonna plastic gauge all of the mains, make sure they're good to go. If they're good to go, I'm gonna put them in. After I do that, I'm gonna get the rods in, plastic gauge all the rods, make sure they're good to go, and we should be good with a good bottom end. Then all I gotta do is a cylinder head. Been working away on getting this engine spec'd out. Mains are actually looking really good. So these are supposed to be from 0.9 of a thou to 1.9 thou, and they're just under 2 thou, all four of these. And this one is supposed to be from 0.1 or 1.2 thou to 2.4 thou, and this one is just a little over 2 thou. So they're all on the higher end of what clearance calls for, but that's okay. When you plan on spinning things fast, you want a little bit extra clearance. So I think we're good to go. I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna clean all of the plastic gauge off all these bearings, off the crank, pull the crank out, put some lube on here, lube everything up nice and good, make sure it's pre-lubricated, throw the thrust washers in, check thrust clearance as well just while I'm in here, and then we should be good to go. That'll be all the clearances checked, and that'll be the crankshaft installed. We'll torque it down one final time, and the crankshaft will be in. It's kind of crazy to think about. I've had this bottom end sitting in the corner of my shop for like 3 months now, and I'm finally getting to build it, and it's really exciting. I cannot wait to get it in the Corolla. We've got a set of head studs, an MLS gasket, and we'll be going together in no time. got the bottom end torqued together. We don't have the pistons on yet, but It spins super free, feels really good. Today we're going to be putting rods and pistons together and throwing them in the block. I'm super excited to be working with Max Speeding Rods. They sent these out. These are 600 horsepower rated rods, which is awesome. They're a lot stouter than these. You can tell how much stouter they are. They're H-beam design, and I think they're going to work out amazing. They've already got ARP hardware in them, and they're going to help us get to our goal of 500 wheel horsepower. And the only aftermarket part in the entire block, other than rings and bearings, which is pretty normal, we're using stock pistons, stock crank, stock block, unmodified, just a decked surface. Those rods are going to be the key to getting us to our power goals. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start throwing everything together, dropping them into the bores. Everything specs out, we're going to torque everything down, and we'll have a fully assembled short block. We're starting to look like an actual assembled block. We got all 4 of the pistons in. We're going to torque everything down with no lube in the bearings to make sure that it's plastic aging in the right realm of oil clearances. As long as all the oil clearances look good on the rods, lube up the bearings, throw it together, and we have a 2RZ short block here. Good to go short block. They should be good for quite a bit of power. I'm excited. This is highest horsepower build I've ever had in any sort of realm. Highest horsepower build that's been on the channel. Highest horsepower car I plan on having. And it's all for that 1,800 pound Toyota Corolla. Whew. It's gonna be freaking rowdy. A little bit more time later, and we got all of the rods torqued on. Everything's looking good, and I'm super stoked. We've got a rotating assembly completely put together. Now I just need to figure out a head. Just about got this engine wrapped up, and I would like to give a massive shout out to Max Speeding Rods. Without them, this project wouldn't be what it is, and I wouldn't be able to push this engine as hard as I want to. They sent me out the connecting rods in this engine that are good to 800 horsepower. They sent me out a GT3582 turbo that's going to be able to push more than enough boost to get to my horsepower needs. And I am very thankful they were willing to jump on with a small creator like me so we could make this project possible. If you're looking for turbos, turbo accessories, suspension components, engine components, really anything you might need to customize your car, head over to Max Speeding Rods and use my code REDLINE at checkout, and that'll get you 10% off your entire order. Now let's get this thing finished up. It's been a couple weeks, but we finally got our cylinder head in with a good surface on it, and we have everything we need to assemble our 500 horsepower engine now. We've got the bottom end built, we've got the head gasket, we've got the head studs. All we got to do is start throwing things together, which means we also need to pull down the rest of our engine from our storage rack. So all we really have left is to start putting things together. We've got all the timing cover, and the head. So I'm just gonna start throwing this thing together one part at a time. We gotta get all the timing stuff on, the front cover on, throw the head on, and we should be good to go. All right, we've got the timing set all together, the timing cover on, everything is looking good. I'm really excited. Everything's gone smooth to this point, and now we get to start cleaning this head surface up, cleaning the head up, and then getting the head studs installed in the block, get our gasket on the block, and put everything together. Soon we're gonna have a full long block, and we can start dealing with the valve train. Valve train is gonna be a little bit of a pain in the butt just because it's shim over bucket, so we're gonna have to take the cams in and out a few times in order to get everything set proper. But once the valve lash is set proper,
we can seal this thing up and it'll be ready to go into the Corolla. So the Corolla should have a built motor pretty darn soon. And once it's got a built motor, we got to build a turbo kit. So making more work for myself, but it's fun work. It's exciting work, that's for sure. So I'm gonna get back to throwing this thing together, getting the head on the block, and getting everything wrapped up. We got the head put on the block. We've got all of the head studs and nuts on. All we've got left is to torque it down. I'm gonna go in 3 steps. ARP's guide on the bolt says 80 foot-pounds. So we're gonna go 3 incremental steps up to 80 foot-pounds, get this torqued down, and then tomorrow morning we'll be able to jump straight on getting this head put together with the valve train and getting all the valves shimmed. That's gonna be a timely process for sure. But for tonight, we went from having a short block to having a long block, and that's really cool.
And it's time to set valve lash on this 2RZ. So here we've got the cams, the cam caps, a micrometer, and 2 engines worth of buckets and shims. In order to set the valve lash on this thing, we're gonna have to arbitrarily take 16 of these buckets with the shims in them, clean them up, throw them in here, put the cams on, tighten them down, and then measure how much clearance there is between the cam and the cap. So once we determine which ones are good, which ones are too big, and which ones are too small, we can go through and start adjusting, swapping them out, and using the extra engines worth of shims in order to make sure everything is within spec. There is about a 4 thou spec on intake and a 4 thou spec on exhaust. So intake needs to be between 6 and 10 thou, and exhaust needs to be between 10 and 14 thou of clearance between the cam and the bucket and shim. So it's going to be a real tedious process. I'm going to jump straight into it, and hopefully we can get it done in a fairly timely manner. I got all of these buckets and shims cleaned up real good. We've got like 23 that are in good shape, and we've got a few that are pitted and not looking super hot. So I organized them with the nicest ones up top and the crappier ones down below. So I just used these first. I'm going to, like I said, pretty arbitrarily just throw these top 16 in the engine. However, I'm going to then install the cams and see how things look. Check the lash. When the lash is too big or too small, I'll know that that one needs changed. Then I'll start pulling things apart and measuring for clearances. I thought about taking all of the shims off and measuring every single one and labeling them beforehand. But if I get some that are right and I don't have to pull them apart, that'll be easier in the long run. So I'm just going to throw them all in there, and whatever's in spec, and whatever's out of spec is going to need changed. After many, many hours of tedious work and going in and out with camshafts a bunch of times, we finally got the lash within spec on all of the valves. It took a ton of in and out and swapping around, and we mic'd out everything here. I ended up pulling apart an entire extra parts engine I had just for more shims and buckets, so we had the proper combination to get this thing together. I'm stoked to finally be moving on to getting the camshafts installed for the final time. We're going to be installing both of them, and
it should be fairly simple. I'm gonna go ahead and re-assembly grease everything because a lot of the assembly grease has since worked its way out. Make sure everything is nice and lubricated up before we put it together for the final time. Then we can throw the timing chain on, throw the tensioner on, and we will finally have a fully assembled 500 plus horsepower 2RZ ready to go into a car. Of course, we're gonna have a few more accessories we need to put on between the alternator and the water pump and motor mounts and all the other little odds and ends. But this long block will be fully assembled, valve train to bottom end. The oil pan that's gonna go on this is custom, and this is no surprise going in my 1979 Toyota Corolla build. And so without further ado, I'm gonna get the camshafts in this thing and torque down for the last time, and we're gonna get this engine finished up. So now that we've got the timing all set and everything is assembled and good to go, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna throw this valve cover on there just to get things covered up, and hopefully in the next few days we can get the Corolla pulled in the garage and start installing this thing. But for now, that's it. So thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing, and I really hope to catch you on the next one.